Robert F. Kennedy Jr., newly appointed head of Health and Human Services, is pushing bold reforms under his Make America Healthy Again initiative, including banning soda purchases with SNAP benefits and limiting pharmaceutical TV ads. This has sparked turf battles with the USDA and obviously backlash from big soda and media reliant on drug ad revenue. As Peter Schweizer highlights on his podcast, The Drilldown, these fights expose crony capitalism, with taxpayer money propping up soda sales and prescription drug demand. Critics argue both systems exploit third-party payers and discourage healthier choices, raising questions of policy, influence, and free speech. Peter's Drilldown co-host Eric Eggers joins us now. Now, this is not a paid advertisement, but I will say, hands down, Drilldown is one of my favorite podcasts. I look forward to its airing every week. Eric, it's such a pleasure to have you on.
Chanel, that's so kind, and it's such an honor to be with you and your audience today. Thank you.
You know, talk to us about this announcement and this effort from RFK Jr. It's received a lot of confusing backlash, actually. I don't know if you've been watching how the political right, some influencers on X were caught in all the scandal about promoting big soda and, you know, freedom of choice got all embroiled in SNAP benefits. But ultimately, where are we in this fight? And what kind of battle does RFK Jr. have as he takes on these two very big fighters?
Chanel, that's an excellent question, and I so appreciate it because that's actually one point I wanted to make on the podcast this week, but we didn't have time to talk about the AstroTurf support from conservative influencers specifically. Riley Gaines actually came out and said that she was approached by a shadowy kind of advertising agency offering up to $1,000 for her to post something in support of people still being able to buy soda with our tax dollars through the SNAP program. And she said, look, I'm not going to do it. She actually said, why would I sell out for what she said was not that much money? Other people came out and said, no, I was approached, I shouldn't have done it. And so it does speak to how much pushback we're going to get from big soda and the American Beverage Association, which of course spends millions of dollars a year in lobbying. And that's just one of the different ways they're trying to fight back. Now, it's interesting because as you know, the head of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. is not in a position to control a program that's ultimately administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But the Secretary of USDA, Brooke Rollins, has said she does support the idea. And as we noted in the podcast, West Virginia's governor has come forward and said he's going to request a waiver from USDA to ban soda purchases. And so, but the reason why people are pushing back, it's not because they think soda's healthy, which of course it's not. An increase in 1 gallon per year of consumptions led to a 5% increase in obesity, which also costs us millions of dollars in terms of the healthcare costs with Medicare and Medicaid, things of that nature. But this is something that is big money for them. You know, this is $100 billion worth of our tax dollars, which goes to the SNAP program, and up to 10%, Chanel, is said to be spent on sugary drinks like soda, which of course doesn't make America healthy.
Well, you know, I don't agree with how these conservative influence got lured into this and they started promoting it, you know, without any disclosure. I think that they should have disclosed some of this, that I think they'd be in less trouble. But I do take and understand the point that is this. Yes, very good that we want to limit unhealthy choices if we're going to tax pay for someone's SNAP benefits. But at some point, the line becomes very blurry. Then you say, well, what other things are we going to start restricting? So there is an ideological war here, and it just seems like big soda is just taking advantage of that because ideologically, they're not totally wrong. I don't think we want government coming in here and starting to micromanage how we spend our grocery dollars, but at the same time, there's some legitimate arguments that RFK Jr. is making about the long-term disaster that is in pouring sugary drinks down our systems.
Well, Chanel, listen, if you want to go to the store right now and buy yourself a soda, I will Venmo you for it, right? I fully support you deciding to spend your money on whatever it is you would like to purchase. But I do think it's not inappropriate for the government to have a say in what people buy with our tax dollars through a program they administer. remember, Chanel, the SNAP program, or it's administered at these EBT cards, which used to be food stamps, and now it's basically a debit card because they wanted to eliminate the social stigma of it. There are already restrictions on what you can and cannot buy. You can't buy hot beverages, for example. You can't go to a restaurant. And so I think it's fair to say, listen, if this thing is as a major aspect of what's purchased through the program, and it's, again, up to 10% of all SNAP purchases go to these sodas and likewise drinks, then I think it's a fair conversation to have ideologically. And the point we try to make in the podcast is that's a conversation that we should have on the merits of it. And it shouldn't be influenced by what's better for Big Soda's bottom line. So remember this, that the idea that they might eliminate soda from the SNAP program is said in these financial disclosures we reviewed before the podcast to cost Coca-Cola up to 2.5% of their global revenue. This is a massive company, so this is big money, and so that's why they're pushing back. They're not pushing back out of issues of freedom of choice. They're pushing back because of what's good for their bottom line, and that, and so I just think we should have the conversation on honest terms.
Right. No, I agree with you. Now, on the other side, you have a topic that's kind of related. You've got this federal proposal, this ban on pharmaceutical advertising, and that's obviously going to run into a lot of First Amendment protections and media industry, practices. There's going to be a lot of obstacles that Kennedy runs into as he tries to implement this. Your take on the feasibility, the practicability of saying, hey, no more medical, pharmaceutical ads on TV?
Well, can we at least agree, Chanel, first of all, that they're like really annoying, right? It's like off Broadway musical production quality.
They're always telling us all the different ways we can die.
I don't have as much of a problem with that. At least that's honest. To me, what's deceptive is all the singing and the dancing. You guys are doing a lot of singing and dancing for people who are depressed or obese, right? Like that's what you're doing in these commercials.
Yeah.
And they're out there and they're, it's the jazz hands that I think are not okay for these pharmaceutical commercials. But I think it's like, that's another conversation that we should have, again, based on what's good for the country. RFK Jr.'s point is that these drugs are being dramatically overprescribed. And so we as a country are less healthy because way too many of us are on prescription drugs. These are not drugs that the doctors are choosing to administer. These are drugs these commercials explicitly tell us to ask our doctor about. And then, of course, they're working the back end of it. Right. Yeah, they're working the back end with the doctors with the lunch and learns and everything else. And so, it used to be that we have made conversations before, had made decisions about what's not okay. Cigarettes are not allowed to advertise on television anymore. And then, of course, the cigarette company, as we pointed out in the podcast, decided, all right, we can't be on TV. So they started advertising in like NASCAR, which is how you got the Winston Cup. And then, unbelievably, cigarettes also started advertising in women's tennis, which I think is an interesting choice. So the point would be that while we're told that it's not likely that these pharmaceutical companies will not be able to advertise, what we're told that actually, ironically, by the cable news networks, of whom pharmaceutical ads are like 30% of their primetime market in terms of the ad revenue. So it's another one where, like, can we actually have an honest conversation, or are you guys on the take as well?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a tough fight because cable is already on its way down, right? And so they're already in a position where they really can't afford to lose any streams of revenue. So very interesting mountain, I think. But with consumers given more choices in how they consume information and therefore how they receive ads, I think this may be something that becomes somewhat obsolete in a few years. I hope it does, but we'll see.
Well,
another topic, last one. President Trump,
I was just going to say, it's not just the cable news. I agree with you. Those are becoming obsolete. It's the network news as well. And remember, those companies are all owned. I mean, those are all conglomerates. Those are multi-billion-dollar companies that it affects their revenue as well. So I do think the forces advocating in favor of the status quo are quite powerful.
The last topic I want to hit with you was President Trump announcing this new $5 million gold card visa program to replace the EB-5 investor visa, promising it will attract wealthy individuals without requiring congressional approval. despite dropping job creation requirements and raising concerns about fairness and oversight. What is your take on this gold card? I think it potentially raises some very interesting influence buying avenues. But what is your take on it initially?
Yeah, what I think they hope it raises is $1 trillion. I mean, that's the argument in favor of it. They say that the EB-5 program, which, as you noted, they want to phase out and replace it with this. They're saying that it has a line of 250,000 applicants. So they feel like if they can get 200,000 people who are waiting in line for this EB-5 thing to pay more than the 1 million required for EB-5, pay 5 million for this gold card, then that's $1 trillion. And that kind of speaks to the whole, why are they doing the tariffs? Why are they doing the Doge? It's because they're trying to get our budget deficits under control. So they think they can raise $1 trillion this way. I think you're absolutely right. I think influence peddling and oversight concerns are very real, but those are very real with the EB-5 program. That's a program that's been abused. It's been abused in California through the Chinese nationals specifically. So anytime you're essentially doing a pay-to-play program for immigration, you're going to have concerns. And so I think good government advocates are right to raise those questions. But I do think that, it's interesting, and I understand the rationale behind it. You can't beat the image of Donald Trump holding up a gold card with his face on it and saying immigrants can buy one for $5 million. It's like classic Trump.
Eric, I think you just said something that raises an interesting principle, though. The more complicated a system, the easier it is to have experts go in and game it. And this seems like a somewhat streamlining of a fairly complicated system. And yes, we don't quite have the oversight ironed out yet, but when you simplify something like this, it's a lot harder to pull one over on the system if it's just a very straightforward program and you're just supposed to do A, B, and C. You can't really maneuver in between the lines when it's that straightforward.
Chanel, that's actually an excellent point, because we've seen so many times with these complicated bureaucracies, the people that create the laws then go and exploit that bureaucracy in the private sector, where the regulator becomes the navigator. And so absolutely that's happening with the EB-5 program. So I do think it's a very compelling argument for the simplification of it. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't still be requirements about, hey, background checks, and let's make sure we're not letting people come in that mean to do us harm just because they can write us a $5 million check. But then again, we've had 4 years of people having literally an open border who couldn't pay to be here. So maybe it's okay to...
at all.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's okay to lessen the oversight for the people that we do think will add to our economic value.
Eric Eggers, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.